I would like to call this meeting to order. It's 9 o'clock. Thank you. I'm going to start a little bit unusually. The first thing I'm going to mention is Jamie, congratulations on behalf of all of us. For those who are wondering why we're congratulating him, Jamie became a father on Saturday. Saturday? Yeah. Zoe, if I understand it correctly? Well, congratulations. So we'll have to make some allowances when you doze off once or twice. But remember, you're very close to Jessica's elbow. And Jessica, I wonder, speaking of you, if you might make a couple introductions for us this morning before we get into the rest of our meeting.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We have two new employees to introduce to members of council and members of the public. We have an acting clerk, Karen Way, sitting beside you. She has been copied on a couple emails, so you know her name anyways. So she is the acting clerk, and then we have an acting deputy clerk, Nicole Kelly, in the crowd today. She is here to watch me work my magic presenting show road allowance applications, because after today I'm done with it, for a little bit anyways.
Thank you. Karen Nicole, welcome, and we'll try to be gentle as we break you into this process, but no promises. Now I'd like to start the more formal portion of our meeting by first doing a land acknowledgement, and that we're to note that we are on the traditional ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Algonquian peoples. This to all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of these lands and waters. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, in our province and our country as a whole. As settlers and visitors, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of indigenous people must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. I would also like to acknowledge the Wata Mohawks, Moose Deer Point, and Christian Islands as indigenous communities within our township. Thank you. I personally want to add that I think what's important about this statement is not only our acknowledgement of the long-term residency of the indigenous folks in our area, but also that I think it should encourage us to take a very long-term perspective on the decisions that we make and the issues we debate, as I think that we should be looking many generations into the future when we make our decisions. Thank you. Fellow councillors, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest that you would wish to bring forward at this point? Councillor Bocek.
Yes, I do. If I can have a look. I have two to declare. One is for the Rogers Tower. I don't have the agenda number because my computer's not up.
That's Wednesday's meeting.
Wednesday's meeting? And more.
Okay, that is today.
All right, thank you. Are there any other councillors with any pecuniary interests they wish to declare? Okay, our first motion before us, be it resolved that council adopts the agenda of the August 12th, 2019 Planning Council meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. This morning, there are two public meetings scheduled for Shore Road closing applications. I will briefly summarize the procedure to be utilized for the meeting. First, the clerk will advise council as to when, how, and to whom notice of the public meeting was circulated, and staff will summarize any correspondence on file. Next, staff will advise of the purpose and effect of the bylaw and provide for any other information that is relevant to the applications. From there, the applicant and members of the public will have an opportunity to speak to the bylaw being considered. Council will then consider the bylaw immediately following. I now declare this meeting to be a public meeting pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001, Circa 25, as amended to deal with the following proposed road closing bylaws. 2019-20 Slemco, and 2019-21 Keating. To the clerk.
Notice of the public meeting was published in newspaper, and notice was sent to the abutting neighbors in the close proximity of the property at least 20 days prior to today's meeting.
Thank you. And to our acting CAO.
Thank you very much. The first application today is for 576 Island 10 in Baxter Lake. They would like to purchase their shore road allowance just for the ownership of it. The area to be sold is 975 square meters of shore road allowance. All right, that's not working. And 537 square meters of road allowance at the top, which is part 2, for a total of $11,022 plus HST, and staff have no concerns with this application.
Thank you. Is the applicant present? Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this matter? Council, that's your turn. Councilor Bianco.
Is there any development on this property?
There is a house on the property, but because it's not on the road allowance or shore road allowance, there's no structures on the parcel they're purchasing, so that's why there's no structures shown on the survey.
Sorry, Councilor Jarvis.
Just curious, the part 2, is that considered shore road allowance?
Road allowance.
Just road allowance, okay,
Yes.
thank you, that's all.
I see no other questions. I'll have one question if I may. I notice the road allowance, part 2, doesn't appear to extend the full length of their property. Is that something that is?
It does.
Yes. Oh. Maybe I misunderstood.
Property line is here. Oh, wait. No, it doesn't. You don't have to buy the entire area of road allowance that's adjacent to it.
You just answered my second question. So they've chosen only to purchase a portion of the
That's right.
the road allowance, and
Yeah.
that's perfectly acceptable.
Yes,
Okay,
it
thank
is.
you. Councillor, shall I call the vote? Be it resolved that council passes bylaws 2019-87, 2019-88, being a bylaw to stop up and close the shore road allowance and road allowance for 576 Island 10, Baxter Lake, and a bylaw to deem the property no longer on a plan of subdivision. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Once again, to our CAO.
Thank you. The next application is for 10158 Georgian Bay Shore to purchase their shore road allowance. They would like to purchase it as there are structures on the property. The total area to be sold is 3,270 square meters for a purchase price of $26,160 plus HST, and staff have no concerns with the application.
Thank you. Is the applicant present? Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this application? Councillors? Councillor Jarvis.
The shore road allowance that's being applied for, that just covers from the property line to the property line, right, around the corner?
That's right.
It just doesn't show one of the diagrams that we were looking at.
So the policy says that the lines will be like a straight line extension. So this one, it comes out like this, over here,
Okay.
and then it comes down like this. So it covers all of this.
And, sorry, one other question. Sir, where exactly is this property in the Georgian Bay, or where is it exactly?
On Georgian Bay Shore,
Georgian Bay Shore, which is?
there's Pratt Bay and Honey Harbor.
Okay, gotcha. So what we're seeing in the satellite photo is obviously at lower water than current, correct?
These photos were taken in 2016.
I can tell you from personal experience that's definitely in lower water than it is right now.
Just clarification, thanks.
Any other questions, councillors? Shall I call the vote? Be it resolved that council pass bylaws 2019-85 and 2019-86, being a bylaw to stop up and close the shore road allowance in front of 10158 Georgian Bay Shore, and a bylaw to deem it no longer on a plan of subdivision. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Our next two applications are under a public meeting held under the authority of the Planning Act. This morning, there's a public meeting scheduled for two proposed zoning bylaw amendments. I will briefly summarize the procedure to be utilized for them. First, the acting clerk will advise council as to when, how, and to whom notice of the public meeting was circulated for the proposed amendments being considered. The acting clerk will also advise of the appeal procedures. Next, staff will advise of the purpose and effect of the bylaws and provide any other information that is relevant to the applications, and the acting clerk will summarize any correspondence on file. From there, the public will have an opportunity to provide comments on the amendments being considered through the mayor. Please be respectful of others' time and be concise with your comments. There's no need to repeat others' comments. It is fine to agree with previous comments. All commentators are encouraged to provide written comments to ensure the accuracy of the comments provided. After the public discussion, the public meeting will be closed. Council will then have an opportunity to provide comments for clarification. I will now declare this meeting to be a public meeting pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act to deal with the following proposed amendments. Z 19-11, Huzing, and Z 19-10, Kaufman.
Notice of the public meeting were sent by first-class mail respective owners and assessed persons within 120 to 800 meters of the property, subject to the proposed applications, and to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the applications. These notices were sent at least 30 days prior to this morning's meeting. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposed applications and a key map showing the location of the properties or a description of the lands to be affected by the proposed amendments. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were all provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the Township of Georgian Bay official plan. Members of the public are advised at this point that unless they make a written or oral submission to council before council makes a decision on these applications, that any subsequent appeal to the local planning appeals tribunal may be dismissed by the tribunal. Anyone who wishes to be notified of council's decision respecting the proposed zoning bylaw amendments must submit a written request to the planning department.
Thank you. The first application being considered is Z 19-11 for 1080 Haskets Drive to the Planning Department.
Good morning. So the first application that you have in front of you is for 1080 Haskets Drive, and it is shown on the screen in black here. There are residential properties to the north and south with crown land, which is shown on the screen in green to the rear. Just to give you an aerial view of the existing development, the aerial lines are not 100%. But you can see the existing cottage on the property. There is a dock parallel to the shoreline along here, and the existing detached garage at the back. So the purpose of the application is to establish a site-specific exception to the 6 Mile Lake residential zone. The applicant is proposing the construction of a 2-story detached garage with a reduced side yard setback to 2 meters from 5 meters. A reduced rear yard setback to 1.1 meters, where 4 meters is required, an increase in the maximum permitted height to 6.5 meters, where 4.5 meters is permitted, and an increase in lot coverage to 8.3%, where 8% is permitted, and to permit a 2nd story in the detached garage for storage only. So the detached garage is proposed to be 100.3 square meters in size. So the application was originally submitted as a minor variance, but through staff's review, it was recommended that it be withdrawn and submitted as a zoning bylaw amendment in order to control the use of that 2nd story of the detached garage. In the zoning bylaw, the 2nd story is only permitted to be a sleeping cabin. They don't have any intention to use it as a sleeping cabin, so through a site-specific exception, we can control that use for storage only in the 2nd floor of the detached garage. And then it will establish a site-specific exception to the 6 Mile Lake residential zone. Just to give you an idea of the subject land, so as you can see on the screen, here's the survey. So you can see the frame dwelling, which is located about 18 meters from the shoreline. There is an existing detached garage that they are proposing to remove and build a new detached garage in the same general location. So just to give you an idea of what the subject property looks like, this is looking from the driveway to the shoreline towards the cottage. And this is standing at the deck, so there is a steep slope from the existing cottage down to that shoreline. This is looking to the east, standing on the deck, and a view to the north from the deck. So this is standing now partway down the stairs, looking back at the existing cottage. So as you can see, there's a steep slope towards that shoreline. And this is the existing cottage. And a view to the cottage from the dock. So as you can see, there's existing mature vegetation, buffering the visual impact of the existing cottage, and the proposed detached garage is set back at the rear of the property. This is the existing detached garage, and you can see the proposed garage location staked out on the screen here. This is the area of the rear yard setback, and the area of where the reduced setback will be. So as you can see, this red stake here is the property line, and you can see the proposed detached garage staked out there. There is crown land towards the rear. So the intent of the rear yard setback is to ensure buildings on adjacent properties are set back appropriately from one another and appropriate distances from abutting roads are maintained. So this is the rear yard, and this is the crown land. This is the rear and the side yard. So the intent of this side yard setback is to ensure buildings on neighboring lots are appropriately set back from one another. It is also to ensure privacy between property owners and their neighbors to protect the enjoyment and use of the waterfront community. So this is the change in topography that is, as you can see, it slopes down here, which is causing that increase in height. And this is a view from the garage towards the cottage and the shoreline. And this is the low spot that I had shown you with the change in topography and looking towards the shoreline. So these are just some draft elevations. They haven't finalized, but just to give you an idea on what the proposed garage is to look like. And the side of it. So height for a detached garage is measured from average finished grade to the midpoint between the peak and the eaves on all four sides of the building, and then we take the average of that. So the intent of the height is to limit scale and visual impact of structures to ensure the aesthetic quality of the waterfront area is protected and that the buildings remain accessory and subordinate to the principal use. So the zoning bylaw allows for the height of attached garage to be increased for the use of a sleeping cabin to 5 meters in height. Otherwise, the height can be 4.5 meters. So the intent of the increase in height is to consolidate structures on a lot to reduce the overall built form. So that would be the intent of putting that sleeping cabin on the second story. However, the second story is proposed for storage only, and through a zoning bylaw amendment, we can control the use of the second floor and prohibit a sleeping cabin on the lands. So the intent of the maximum permitted lot coverage is to establish a relationship between the coverage of buildings and structures and size of a lot to ensure that lots are not overdeveloped. The garage meets the intent of the zoning bylaw, as overall the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the township and district official plans. So should there be no opposition raised at the public meeting, staff recommend that council adopt the bylaw. The owner and agent are present at the meeting, and they may provide you with some additional comments, but if you have any questions for me, I'm available.
Thank you. Have we received any correspondence on this file?
We've received one letter of support, was received from Dave Vincent, and the District of Muskoka has no objections.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public or the applicant who wish to speak to this matter? If you do, please come forward to the microphone and state your name and your comments, please.
Yep. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Council. Lanny Dennis, Wayne Simpson and Associates. I think that's a fair and accurate assessment as presented by the Planning Department, and certainly concur with them to approve the application. And I certainly appreciate the efforts of working with staff bringing the proposal forward. The owners of the property are in the gallery this morning as well. Now, I think generally speaking, the goal of your township's official plan is to minimize visual and environmental impacts. And you know, the staff have done an excellent job in terms of providing their comments and analysis in the report. I just simply want to highlight maybe and augment a few of those comments that have already been made by planning staff. The owners of the property have owned it since 1988, and it's been used permanently since 1995. So they've been longtime residents of 6 Mile Lake. The additional storage is required. It's a fairly modest size cottage with only a crawl space and a small detached garage presently. Certainly inadequate, in my opinion, for use for storage being full-time residents. What they like to do is consolidate the 2 uses, the garage and the storage, into one building, so you don't end up with sort of sprawl of clutter on the property. That helps reduce the built form. And in fact, you know, there's 2 buildings now. There's going to be 2 buildings after this proposal. Overall, I think in the photos that were presented by staff, the property is very well vegetated with existing mature tree cover. And I think generally speaking, the owners have been good land stewards of the property. Also noted was a rise in shoreline topography of about, I'd say, 35 feet or so. It's well vegetated as well. The neighbors' cottages are located closer to the shoreline, sort of not back where the proposed garage is intended to be located. There's a vacant lot that these folks own that separates this property from the abutting property to the south. The additional 140 square feet of built form is approximately 230 feet from the shoreline. And I think all this to say is that, you know, all these factors, sort of the cumulative effect of those, add up to the fact that the proposal will be fairly innocuous, seen from the shoreline and from the neighbors, and in fact, the garage will not be seen from the shoreline. So it minimizes the visual impact to as best as its ability, given the site circumstances and the on-site situation. To minimize the environmental impact, certainly it's a long ways from the shoreline. Staff have noted that it'd be subject to site plan control. There'll be there's no use of the existing septic system. It's not being tied into the septic system. And they're basically utilizing the location of the existing garage and disturbed area at the back of the property, as noted by staff. There's been one letter of support received, and it's my understanding that 4 of the neighbors in the immediate area have had communication with the owners of the property, and none have expressed any concerns with respect to the proposal. So it'll be my submission that, as noted in the staff report, that Council, respect to request Council approve the zoning bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the additional information. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to this application? Yes, sir. Could you please come forward and state your name? And you can come to one of the tables here or the podium, whatever you prefer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the committee. My name is Bruce Owen. I reside at 1068 Haskett. It is directly to the south and adjacent to the property of Mr. Hysink. My parents purchased it in 1950 and has been there and been a permanent resident as our official address for about the last 15 years. Mr. My cottage and Mr. Heising's cottage and the neighbor to the north immediately are serviced by one long driveway that serves all three of us. I am aware of the project and the request for the variances, and the new garage would be on the same footprint, but much larger. The present garage cannot be seen from the lake, and it cannot be seen from Haskett Drive, and it cannot be seen from my cottage. I'd like to tell the committee that I have no problem, no concerns regarding this project, and I am positive that the finished project will be equally as good as Mr. Heison's present cottage. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, sir. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to this file? Council, who would like to ask some questions? Councilor Bocek.
Thank you. My question is to the planning department. My only concern or lack of knowledge would be with the size of the shed dormer on this garage. And is there any prohibiting factors within the 6 Mile Lake community plan, within the official plan, that would inhibit the shed dormer of that size on this building?
So through your worship, we don't have any restrictions on the size of a dormer currently in either official plan or zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Yanko.
I just have some questions, and this is more or less general, not necessarily pertaining to this application. Is there a map that's going to go to the Committee of Adjustments, but since they proposed to put storage above the garage, it came to us. So actually, if this proposal came forward with sleeping quarters above the garage, it would have gone to the Committee of Adjustments?
Through your worship, if the second story was for a sleeping cabin, they would need relief to exceed the maximum floor area for a sleeping cabin. So a sleeping cabin can be 56 square meters, and they're 100.3. So they would need relief, whether it be through council or Committee of Adjustment, to have an oversized sleeping cabin.
And so therefore, you would suggest it gone to the Committee of Adjustment?
It could go either way.
Okay. I'm just wondering about this idea of the storage. I appreciate that it's proposed by this proponent to have storage there, but who knows what the next owner is going to do or what's going to happen down the road. So if they did turn that storage into a sleeping area, they may not get a permit, they may not even tell the township that they're doing it. How do we find out about this? I know that would be illegal, but how do you control it if you don't know about it? And is there any engineering differences between storage and sleeping?
Through your worship, so just to answer the first part of the question is, how would you ever know? Like any zoning enforcement matter, it's a complaint-based process, so there'd have to be a complaint made and an investigation undertaken. As far as the difference in terms of engineering, that would be a building code matter. So if a future owner was to consider the use of this space for a sleeping cabin and not storage, to do it legally, they'd have to apply to the township for either a minor variance to allow for that increased sleeping cabin size, or to council for a zoning bylaw amendment to allow for that. So there'd be a planning approval required. And then secondly, from the engineering aspect of it, there'd be the building department would have to consider the building code if there's any specific differences for storage space versus used for human habitation. That's the key difference, is human habitation if it's used for a sleeping cabin.
So basically, this is honor-based. In other words, the proponent would have to come forward and say, I'm going to do this, or the neighbor's got to squeal on and so on. But beyond that, there's really nothing.
Yeah, through your worship, I'd say that's a fair comment, and that's not different than any other application.
Yeah, but it would be double the size. It would be almost double the size of a normal sleeping cabin and so on. So I don't know. It's I'm sure this proponent has good intentions, but I'm just worried about the next owner and so on going ahead and doing something illegal.
Councilor Jarvis.
I'm just going to follow up on Councillor Wianko's comments there. One, this is a really nice design. I take this as a cottage, to be honest with you, if I had the option. Anyway, just to follow up on what Councillor Wianko said, is it possible for us to require that something be put on the bill of sale should it come up for sale, that the garage is meant to be for garage and storage only, or is that something that's beyond our control?
Through your worship, we can't put anything on the bill of sale, but this proposal will have a site-specific zone associated with it. So the SR6 dash, I forget the exception number it is.
Yeah.
And that exception number will specifically state that the upper level of the garage is only to be used for storage. And a copy of that bylaw is attached here. So although it would not be in the bill of sale, the best way the township can alert any future owners of what the permitted uses are on the property is through the zoning bylaw, and this property would have a unique zone specifically for that site, where it's identified. So that should be a red flag to any future property owners on or prospective property owners on what the uses are that's permitted in that building.
Just to follow up then, Jamie, so that means that if somebody was planning on, if in the future this place came up for sale and somebody was looking at buying it, would there be some way that they would see that red flag? Would their real estate agent see that?
Your worship, I would hope the real estate agent would alert them to their zoning. I see
Or
Armin
their
nodding
lawyer.
over here in the background. But typically I would hope people would look at the zoning. We can't ensure everybody does, but that's really the best mechanism the township has to make people aware of the property is the zoning bylaw and the uses. So I guess that's all we can do from a township perspective.
Councillor Hazelton, followed by Councillor Bochek.
This question is to planning. Is this intended to be put under site plan control?
Through your worship, yes, they would be required to go under site plan control.
And because it's under site plan control, the site plan is registered on the deed?
Yes, it gets registered on title.
So the visibility would be through the lawyer who's doing the research on the property. If it's ever sold, the site plan then becomes visible, and those constraints are then become shared with the new owner.
Correct, yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Bochek.
Yes, a little more in-depth into Councillor Hazelton's question. In reading through the recommendations from planning, it says that a site plan control would be in place for the vegetation within the shoreline protected area. The site plan control agreement, which will land on the deed, is that going to include something in reference to the second story of the garage being used for storage only? Because currently in the dossier we were given, it's only mentions the vegetative buffer to be included in the site plan control.
Through your worship to Councillor Bochek, typically the use of the property or the use of buildings and structures is dictated through the zoning bylaw. That's the role of the zoning bylaw. We could include a provision in the site plan agreement that references the zoning bylaw and what the site-specific zoning on the property indicates, but that is the role of the zoning bylaw, not the site plan, to specify the uses of the property, but we could include a reference in it.
To that, I think that would be important that would be included. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, I was just going to concur with that it needs to be very clear that this is storage, and any way that we can ensure that that's included and that lawyers will see it and purchaser will see it, I think that's the ultimate objective. I think there are other methods, including putting things on title. So this is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. No other comments from councillors? I'll have one inquiry, if I may, is that you say there's no plumbing water service to this building. Would they require an application to our building department if they're ever to service this building with water?
Your worship, yes, they would require a building permit.
Thoughts? Councilor Cooper?
Yeah, if I may, just in the interest of public transparency, I find it kind of unfortunate every time we have one of these public meetings to have to ask for a recorded vote. So I'd rather not have to do that. So I'm really going to suggest that we all vote and show our votes on these matters so that the public is aware of that, if I may. Thank you.
With this particular public meeting, normally they would come back to us at the following meeting, having digested all the comments they've heard, unless you're suggesting that you think might be possible that we vote today.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we're not voting on this today?
Only if council wishes to vote on today, but normally we would not vote on today.
Okay. So if we're conducting a vote on any of these matters, I'm just suggesting that rather than calling for a recorded vote, that we have a show of hands. Thank you.
No further comments on this file? All right, we'll go on to the next one. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so, sorry, through your worship, I'm just going to make a comment. So staff's recommendation was if there was no oral opposition raised at the meeting for council to make a vote on the application today, if council is comfortable with that.
Councilor Wojcik.
Being that we have a fairly short envelope to build in, or to do anything in this part of the country, I wouldn't object to bringing this to a vote today.
Councilor Jarvis.
I'd have no objection bringing this to a vote today as well, so long as we have some assurance that that the issue with regards to the use of that upper story for future owners is clarified or clear for us. That's it.
Yep.
That'd be it.
Through you, your worship, if you want to add that to the resolution, that it be implemented in the site plan as well, then you can add that.
But staff has heard that, and we do have that as notes as well.
Shall I read the motion? Be it resolved, the council adopts bylaw 2019-84, being a zoning bylaw amendment, zoning bylaw 18/37, for 1080 Haskets Drive. All those in favor? All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. That's my form of raising my hand by saying it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay. Next in front of us is the Development Services Report 2019-83 for Kaufman on 40410 Georgian Bay Shore in Wawatasi to the Planning Department.
So our next application is for 40410 Georgian Bay Shore, and the subject property is shown on the screen in black. So it is a through lot within Wawatasi in our official plan. It is zoned shoreline residential type 5, and along this southern shoreline there is type 1 fish habitat. There is no hold on the subject lands as it is not an island property. So here's an aerial view of the subject lands. It has a lot area of 3.9 hectares or 9.6 acres and a lot frontage of 369 meters. So the purpose of the application is to rezone the fish habitat type 1 zone along the shoreline to lakeside zone in order to permit a dock. They're also requesting a temporary dock prior to the construction of the main dwelling. So the effect of the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone the FH1 zone to LS, with the remainder of the shoreline zoning remaining unchanged. So that SR5 zone will remain as is, and they would need to comply with those requirements in order to build their dwelling and install a septic system. So here's this subject property, so it would get a site-specific zoning. So lakeside zone is essentially the default zoning. So if any shoreline that is not zoned environmental protection or fish habitat falls under the lakeside zoning. So that allows any shoreline structure, so a dock, an in-water boathouse, or what have you. So since this lot is currently zoned FH1, a study, a fish habitat impact assessment was submitted with the application, which identified an area that was not fish habitat type 1. So that's the area that is proposed to be rezoned to the lakeside zoning. Right. So here's a survey of the subject lands. So on the fish habitat impact assessment, they identified Reach 1 and Reach 2. So this portion, well, about here, I don't have the exact measurements, is zoned Reach 2, which when they went out to the property identified it was fish habitat type 2 zone. So not critical type fish habitat, but the remainder of the shoreline, and I do have some photos to better represent, is to remain as FH1 as it is critical fish habitat zone. So they do have their 30-meter setback, which is this line here, for their septic, and their 20-meter setback. So there is adequate room for a cottage and a septic system on the subject lands. So this is the western side of the subject lands, and this is looking at the southern shoreline, so the area of FH2 that can be rezoned. This is the southern shoreline, where the dock can be, and another view of that shoreline. So on the screen here, this is the natural construction path that they can use. It's a naturally cleared area of bald rock. So at the end of this boat, roughly where that flag is where the end of Reach 2 is. And as you can see, if you look further in the photo, that's going to remain FH1 because it is critical fish habitat. So this is standing on the subject lands. This is sorry, it has fallen down since it was staked out in the winter, but it shows the 20-meter setback. And this is a view from the proposed building location. So as you can see, this orange tape here representing that 20-meter setback. And another view from the proposed building envelope. And this is standing at that rear of that proposed building envelope. So as you can see, there is a naturally flat, open area. Looking south, the southern shoreline. And a view towards the eastern part of the property. So this is the area that's going to remain type 1 critical fish habitat, and it's identified as Reach 1 in the environmental report. And this is going around, so on the survey there was that island, so this is going around to the other side of the property, and as you can see on that same southern shoreline, as you can see, this is the area of the type 1 fish habitat. And then just a closer view of that fish habitat. So a fish habitat impact assessment was received and circulated to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. The zoning bylaw does not permit accessory structures prior to a dwelling. You can get your permit for your dwelling, dock, and septic all at the same time, because as long as you have construction, you can have your dock there. However, the applicant wants to have the dock prior to the dwelling in order to best site where they want to put their dwelling. They're going to put it in that natural flat area that I showed you, but they haven't finalized where they want to put it, and they want to be able to access the property easier in order to find that location. So the application is to have a dock prior to the dwelling. So the fish habitat impact assessment identified Reach 1 and Reach 2, and so Reach 1 being that fish habitat type 1, and Reach 2 is the area of fish habitat type 2, which is not critical. So the area of Reach 2 is where they can have their proposed dock. So staff are recommending that a temporary bylaw be permitted for the dock prior to the dwelling. So we're recommending this so that the dock can exist for 3 years, and should the principal dwelling not be constructed in that time, the dock would need to be removed. If the dwelling is constructed within that 3-year period, the dock would be able to remain as it would be in compliance with the zoning bylaw. And the dock would need to comply with the setbacks, maximum length and width. The application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the township and district official plan. So staff recommend that, provided there are no oral objections raised at the meeting or no concerns from council, that the application be adopted today. And the owner is present if you have any questions for himself or if you have any questions for me.
Thank you very much. Acting Clerk, do we receive any correspondence on this application?
One letter of support was received from Doug Grant. The District of Muskoka would not be opposed to the approval of the application, provided appropriate development control techniques are used to implement the recommendations of the Fish Habitat Impact Assessment respecting dock envelopes, dock types, construction mitigation measures, and vegetation retention.
Thank you. The applicant is present. Do you wish to speak to this matter?
Yes.
Please come forward.
Good morning, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Stu McGill. I am not the owner. I hope to be the owner very, very shortly. So this has been a property in the Kaufman family for many years. I have to say I really appreciate your opening statement. I would love a copy of that. I too take the responsibility of land stewardship very seriously. This is a fabulous property, and I want to have as minimal impact as possible and go through the proper channels to ensure that. Saw the place with the natural rock and gentle slope where I would like a dock now to access a building site. If we go back 6 years ago and return to those water levels, though, that's my concern. So my ask is the neighbors next door, the Forstner family, they're zoned shoreline residential, and if I could just have a continuous zoning from that, if by bad luck we return to the water levels of 6 years ago, I could move the dock over and again have minimal impact, so I wouldn't have to require dredging or anything like that. So I want a very small dock and minimal impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this? Council, your turn. Councilor Rienko.
Can you be a bit more specific as to the location of this dock?
Yeah.
Sure. Pull up the survey. So Reach 2 goes from this corner into this area here. So they would be permitted to put their dock anywhere within that area.
And that's
I'm
where
not
that
sure.
rock is.
Yes, so it ends just at that natural construction path that I had shown you a photo of,
Yeah.
where that dock was. So it ends here, which is just outside of this construction path here. Stu may be able to provide a more specific location, but I believe he was looking to put his dock generally where that boat is. Where we parked.
And the next question is, do they own the shore road allowance?
I don't believe this property has a shore road allowance. So they would own right up to the water.
I've never heard of this reach thing. Is this something new terminology that it's showing up in our planning regulations? Is F1, F2 is the same thing as reach 1, reach 2, so?
Through your worship, so it was the environmentalists that used the terms reach 1 and reach 2. Reach 1 in our zoning bylaw would refer to fish habitat type 1. No, sorry, backwards. Yes, that was correct. Reach 1 is fish habitat type 1. Reach 2 would be the fish habitat type 2. It's just the terminology used by the environmentalists, but they identified what each one recommended.
Councilor Bocek.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with this, but I'm not sure we have a policy with a temporary dock status. And my concern is that if you allow a dock to be put into an area without a dwelling on the property, there's no regulations on what that dock can be. Obviously, the ideal situation would be a floating dock, which would have minimal impact to the adjacent waters, which are fish habitat. But currently, he could, if we grant this, install a crib dock, disturb, and it'd be more permanent. And in the case where the 3 years had lapsed, it would be very difficult to have it removed as opposed to a floating dock, which can just be hooked onto and dragged away. So my question is, what building form are we looking at in the way of this dock? And is there any way that we can ensure that the dock is temporary, a 3-year period, and it's floating in nature, so it can be removed. Thank you.
Through your worship to Councillor Bocheck. So the bylaw that was prepared by staff was to allow for the dock from August 12th, 2019 to August 12th, 2022. But we didn't specify if it was a floating dock or a crib dock. They could install either or. They would just have to be in compliance with the size requirements in the bylaw.
Perhaps we could ask the applicant what his intent is, and that way we'd have a little more information to move forward on this.
I did see his hand go up more than once.
Oh.
Go ahead, please, sir.
Absolutely, it'll be a small floating dock with 2 pins to the shore. So just 2 pins, minimal impact, and whatever you would call those rods going onto the dock with a small ramp and crisscrossing cables. So if it was ever removed, there'd be 4 little half-inch holes in the rock.
Thank you. Councilor Cooper.
That's very good news, and I'm just wondering then if, to the point that's being raised by Councillor Bocheck, that we actually state that it will be a floating dock as opposed to a permanent dock. Not that I distrust this gentleman, it's simply that it would make sense to go down, to have that in place. We have that security. Thank you.
Through your worship, if council wanted to add that as a resolution or add it onto the resolution, then we can ensure it's a floating dock.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
Perhaps just an amendment to the resolution.
Yeah. Anyone else wish to speak to this, or should we talk about amending the resolution? I mean, right now it just simply reads that we adopt the bylaw, but we can say something about including, specifying, I'm not sure which word, but specifying that the dock structure be a floating dock.
Yeah, Your Worship, if you do adjust the resolution, then we can update the bylaw prior to signing.
I think that would be council's wish, and obviously no disagreement from the applicant, which I'm sure you understand our motivation. I'll read the bylaw for your, sorry, Councilor Jarvis.
Sorry, I have one question before we get to the motion. Thank you. My concern is if we allow for a dock anywhere along that shoreline, that would indicate to me that there will be significant shoreline alteration in order to move the dock from that one spot, which is a natural loading and unloading zone where the rock comes to the shore. And what is our policy with regards to shoreline alteration?
To the planning department.
through your worship, the dock can only be within reach 2, which is in this area here.
Your photos indicate significant vegetation along that shoreline, from what I saw anyway. I could be looking at the pictures incorrectly. Yes. So except for that one spot, and yes, but he wants the latitude to be able to move it should there be an issue with the water level change. Is what was indicated. I could have that wrong, but he wanted within reach 2, right? The whole shoreline within reach 2 would be possible development for a dock if he chooses to move it. So that to me indicates he's going to have to do something with the vegetation in order to move the dock if that becomes necessary. And I'm just curious to know if we have a policy or have one in place, or whether there would one that would apply with regards to what he can do with the vegetation along the shoreline, other than this one spot where in that reach 2 area.
Your Worship, to Councillor Jarvis, the zoning bylaw has a restriction in terms of the amount of the width of vegetation that's required to be maintained in the front yard. So there is a general regulation that applies across the board to all shoreline properties. So that would apply here. If the proponent proposed to move the dock from one location to another and vegetation needed to be removed accommodate that, then that provision would kick in. And we haven't evaluated this specific reach in terms of the shoreline of the property and what the requirements are with respect to that, but he would have to meet those requirements in the bylaw. So there's a general provision in place in the zoning bylaw that applies to all shoreline properties with respect to the amount of width of area of vegetation that can be in the front.
So clarification then, if he chose, if for whatever reason, and I don't even know if that's the case with this, but the water drops 6 feet, as it's been known to do, and he finds he has to move the dock, then he'd have to come to council or to the planning department for a request to make the change?
Through your worship, he would not have to come to council, provided he fell within the requirements of the zoning bylaw. If he wanted to exceed those general provisions of the zoning bylaw, then yes, he would have to come back to council. But there's some as-of-right permissions for some flexibility that are built into the bylaws.
And I don't have a problem with that, just in my mind, if he has to move that dock, vegetation will have to be moved, that's all.
Council, I will read the amended resolution. It now reads, be it resolved that Council adopt bylaw 2019-83 being a zoning bylaw amendment Z19-10 for 40410 Georgian Bay Shore, and that the bylaw be updated to specify only a floating dock be permitted. Are you willing to vote on this resolution? Then consider it read and your vote, please. Councilor Douglas, are you abstaining? Sorry? Oh, all right, well then it is unanimous. Thank you. Your dock has been approved.
I'm leaving, but thank you all for your time and consideration.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Council, we're now about to step into the not public meeting portion of our meeting. The file in front of us now is Development Services 2019-85 for Morrow to the Planning Department.
Mr. Randall, excuse me, and if you could get me, I'll be in the chamber.
Oh, this is your conflict? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next application that you have before you was originally heard back in January. So I'm not going to go into a crazy amount of detail, but I wanted to just refresh your memory on what the application is. So it's for 818 Island 820 Georgian Bay, and the subject lands is shown on the screen in black. It is designated waterfront within the Honey Harbor Coastal Waterfront Community, and it is on Mermaid Island. So the subject lands is currently vacant and is shown on the screen in red, but you can see the development on the neighboring properties. So the application is 2 parts. So as I had mentioned back in January, one is to lift the hold, and the second is to permit a dock within the fish habitat type 1 zone. So all vacant islands on Georgian Bay are placed into a hold, no matter what their size is. So if they're undersized, they exceed the limits, all vacant islands are placed into a hold. The requirements to remove the hold are a survey confirming the high water mark and the lot area above that high water mark. On Georgian Bay, this is the 177.4 contour. So the second part is that the applicant is proposing a dock and a type 1 fish habitat. So that has been added with the application to do it into 2 parts. So the effect of the zoning bylaw amendment would allow for the development of a single detached dwelling and accessory structures, and to establish a site-specific exception to the fish habitat type 1 zone. So this is the subject property where you can see the FH1, so it would get a site-specific exception to FH1-5. Just an overview again, this is the survey that was submitted, and the lot area has been confirmed. So there is a lot area of 4,995 square meters and a lot frontage of 80.6. The subject lands is zoned shoreline residential island type 1, which requires a lot area of 4,000 square meters and a lot frontage of 60 meters. So the lot exceeds these requirements. The fish habitat impact assessment identified an area for the proposed dock. So the most suitable area is within this orange square there. And as per the comments received at the last council meeting, council wanted to see this dock on the survey and the proposed building and septic envelopes. So as you can see, there is a dock shown here on the survey that complies with the requirements of the zoning bylaw. This dock was sent to the author of the environmental report to ensure that the location and size were suitable and complied with the recommendations, and it was confirmed that the dock, as shown on the screen, is okay. And there is the building and septic envelope within the requirements of the zoning bylaw on the screen there. Just an overview again, so these are the pictures back from the first site visit, so these were taken back in November. So you saw these at the last council meeting, so this is looking at the adjacent property to the east. A view of that shoreline that is zoned fish habitat type 1. This is that western property line between the subject lands and the adjacent property owner. Another view, and then neighboring development on the western property. So the subject lands will have a lesser visual impact than the adjacent properties, as they're not permitted to have a boathouse or an in-water boat port or in-water boathouse, and the dwelling would have to meet a setback of 20 meters. So again, this is that shoreline that is zoned fish habitat type 1. This is looking southwest. A view to the east, and you can see the neighboring boat port. And a view to the south and southwest. So staff conducted another site visit during the summer months in July when we do have high water. So you can see the existing for sale sign. The building envelope that I showed you on the survey previously is to the right. So it's back 20 meters and to the right. So this is a shoreline view in front of the building envelope. This is looking northeast to the northeast neighbor. So as you can see, there's significant vegetation buffering any visual impact to that neighbor. And looking to the southwest neighbor. So again, there is vegetation buffering. This is the front left corner of the dwelling, so the southeast corner of that envelope. And the septic location is to the north of this clearing, so behind that elevated rock there. And this is the southwest shoreline. So the main concerns at the previous council meeting, so I did outline them in the report, but I just wanted to touch on a few, was that the lands was undersized, a hold was placed on the subject lands for good reason, there's shallow watering which will require dredging, and species at risk needs to be addressed. So all of the concerns were outlined in the report. So the subject lands is designated residential in the official plan within the waterfront community. Holds are placed on all vacant islands in Georgian Bay, no matter what their size is. And the only requirement to lift the holds is a survey confirming the area above the high water mark and the location of the high water mark. So the subject lands is not undersized. It actually exceeds the requirements of the shoreline residential island type 1 zone. An addendum to species at risk was done, and site plan control will be applied to the subject lands. And the development plans, should the subject owner or future owner submit them, would be required to go back to the author of the environmental report for their review to ensure they comply with all of the mitigation measures and any potential species at risk. And this can also be done during site plan, so that will be done during the site plan control stage. And the onus would be on the owner to comply with the Endangered Species Act. So the fish habitat impact assessment outlined many mitigation measures for a dock, and they are reflected in the bylaw, and they will be implemented through site plan control. The dock is to allow for access and not an entertainment area. Any dredging would require a permit through the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, but no dredging is proposed, and the dock, as per the recommendations of the environmental report, should be able to be constructed in there without any dredging. Approval of the application would allow for a dock within a type 1 fish habitat and lift the hold. So a second site visit was done in the summer, and the water depth at the approximate location of the dock was about 6 feet roughly. The property is well vegetated and the area complies with the bylaw, and they have identified the septic and building location that comply with the bylaw. And there will be limited visual impact to the shoreline and adjacent property owners. So staff recommend that council adopts the bylaw, but if you have any additional questions for myself, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you. Councilors, who would like to speak to this matter? Councilor Bianco.
So there's two issues here. There's the removal of the H, and basically all you need is a survey, and I think council wanted to know where the buildings and septic systems, so that's been done. That doesn't seem to be an issue right now. The other issue was the issue of the dock. This is what, a 90-foot dock. It's quite far out into the water. I guess they've done that to get to the certain height, or depth of water. If we were to turn down the idea of the dock location, they would probably get the H removed, so they could actually build. If they weren't allowed a dock, they could actually pull up to the shore and pull up boats on the shore and pull up barges on the shore. Nothing stopping that from happening. So they can actually go ahead and build without a dock
Your worship, yes, they could pull up on shore.
anywhere along that shore. There's no particular area that they would have to. So basically, they can do a lot more damage by not allowing a dock, probably.
Your worship, probably.
Yeah.
Councilor Hazelton.
Are you going to review the comments that were in the minutes?
If you want to, there was a whole listing of the comments and their responses to them, and if you want to highlight any of them.
There was a recent communication that was included in the report.
Have you received any correspondence on this recent?
Because it's not a public meeting, any new correspondence was not mentioned, but as far as I know, council was emailed all of the correspondence that came in, I think, last week.
And would you review some of that correspondence?
Sure.
Please.
Before you do that, though, could I ask a couple of things? Could you show us a survey and show us where the hydro line goes?
Through your worship to Councillor Hazelton, this is the hydro wire identified here.
Okay. And then the next, could you show us the survey, sorry, the diagram where you show the fish habitat?
So it's right here.
I guess what I'm trying to do is help everyone understand how far out and extensive the fish habitat is compared to the property. So if you look at your diagram, back up to the proposed dock structures, which a couple of slides earlier. Okay, back up. No, not that one, the next one. Okay, so you've got proposed dock sections. If you were to overlay the fish habitat on that, you would see that the dock likely doesn't project out more than 25% into the fish habitat. So basically what you're saying is you've got, for whatever the dimensions are, let's say you've got an 80-foot dock, you've got 4 times that for the fish habitat that someone would have to travel through before they even get to the dock. It sounds like we're dealing with a much, much more significant fish habitat concern than is being suggested through these diagrams. Does that make sense?
Yes, is there a question?
Oh, I guess the question is, two things. One, your fish habitat isn't effectively shown in this diagram. It makes it difficult for councillors to get an effective view of this, but if the objective is, as was included in the opening statement by His Worship, on the Indigenous focus on protecting the environment and so on, and we have a fish habitat that is 4 times or 3 times, well, four times out from where the docks are in this diagram, which means you're traveling through 75% of the fish habitat before you even get to a dock. And then you tell us that the dock water depth at the end of the dock is 6 feet, and that we know that the water right now in Georgian Bay is 6 feet higher than it is in low water. What we're looking at then is a bay that will be mostly dry and not accessible. And you would likely have to have a dock 4 times that length in order to be able to effectively get to it. Of course, if you did that, you would be projecting a dock way beyond the lot line extension capabilities. So it just seems like this is, in my opinion, a complete non-starter. You've got an incredible wetland. You've got an entire shoreline that is a natural vegetated state. As I say, an enormous fish habitat from a consideration of the properties in this area. And I guess what I'm missing is, how is it that we can navigate and drive through fish habitat on a regular basis to get to and from a dock, which is also in fish habitat, and not be destroying the fish habitat? I just don't understand how that can happen.
So through your worship to Councillor Hazelton, so we had the environmentalist identify the most appropriate location and give a recommendation on the size of a dock should council approve the application. So the area within these orange transects are where the environmentalist has identified as the most appropriate location. So staff are not experts on aquatic biology, so we rely on the expertise of a third party to provide those opinions. And so that's the location that the environmentalist has identified. Whether or not the mapping is 100% accurate on if the extent of it falls exactly at that area, we don't know. But the environmentalist has identified that within this location would be the minimal disruption to the fish habitat.
Councillor Douglas, your hand is up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are we allowed to build any docks in FH1 normally?
Your worship to Councillor Douglas, currently no.
Okay, so this is an identified area that the biologists feel would be ideal if a dock is allowed.
Correct.
And I just might make a comment, if the water does drop out that far as has been suggested by my fellow councillor, we would not have an FH1 at all if it's dried up. So I don't see there being much of a problem here. If it's been identified already, should the water levels go down, then we lose a lot of that fish habitat anyways. So I don't particularly see a problem. And if it's allowable for a barge to pull in or somewhere else, then I think there'd be more damage done to the shoreline personally. I think it's better to have a dock to control that.
Councillor Hazelton.
I'll confess I'm not the expert, but I have listened to experts on wetlands, and they tell us that the rise and fall of the waters in Georgian Bay are what make the wetlands so rich and productive. And so as the water level drops, we get more rich shoreline growth, as you see in the pictures already. And essentially what happens then is the fish habitat moves out with the water and back in with the water. And therefore, the water levels going up and down, you don't lose a fish habitat. The fish habitat migrates out from shore. So that's an important thing to understand. Secondly, I would like to offer a couple of things here. The recent communication that has been circulated to all councillors was, one of them was a review of the property by North-South Environmental. Now, I want to point out that the township has selected North-South Environmental to be the peer review agency representing the township on the Macy Bay matter. And so I would say that there's a very high level of trust on the North-South Environmental side to represent the township interests, perhaps as opposed to a developer or applicant interests. And specifically, the recommendations in the North-South Environmental Review is that the H2 holding not be lifted, as the information is inadequate to support the conclusion that a cottage and dock could be built without impacts on SAR, wetland, and the fish habitat. So I think we've got lots of, and I accept the fact that our planning department are not experts on this wetland areas and fish habitat, but the expert that we are relying on other matters is stating quite categorically that we don't know how to put a dock safely without destroying the fish habitat and the wetland. And I think we need to respect those valued opinions as we go about making decisions on this.
Councillor Wienko, followed by Councillor Jarvis. Followed by Councillor Cooper.
Oh, okay. Again, this is another philosophical question, but if you take the dock out of it and we say no dock, you can't have a dock, could they go ahead and get the the H lifted, either through ourselves or through an OMB or whatever? They've done the survey, they've shown a site. Could they get that lifted from any agencies?
Through your worship to Councillor Wayanko, they do meet the requirements to have the holds lifted.
Okay, so having completed that process, then they can go ahead and build with or without a dock, correct? Okay, so then you're looking at pulling up on the shore and so on. No matter what the height is, they can pull up on shore and start building whatever they want. So do we want that, or do we want them to have a dock and with minimum impact on the environment? I guess that's the question we have right now. And this particular Northwest, I haven't seen that report. Anybody else? I have not seen that report.
It's not Northwest, it's North-South, and it was emailed to everyone.
I didn't get it. So so anyway, I've not seen that. So anyway, that's my comment.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, I'm in favor of Councillor Hazelton's proposal here. I'm concerned even if we were to lift the hold, allowing the dock structure, any construction equipment is going to come in on that shore anyway, because that's the most logical way to unload heavy equipment to do building. Having said all that, I have a couple questions. One, that aerial that we're looking at right now, do we know what year that was taken?
Through your worship, it was the environmentalists that submitted it, but if you got it from our system, it would have been 2013. So I can't confirm if he got it.
It looks like an older shot because it looks like low water to me.
Our image, this one is 2013. It looks the same, so it's probably about 2013.
Yeah, so would you mind going back to that previous one?
Sure.
So if we look at this, so my questions are twofold, or observations. One, you can go back to if you go back to is it a white line that's showing is it not the high water mark? Okay, along the shoreline there. So that would be the current, you see the tree line there, so that would be currently where the water is today, about. Just for a point of information, and so there is significant shoreline showing in that photo that we would not see today. The envelope that is shown there in orange, is that the extent out from shore that the dock can go as well?
Your worship, no, that is just the location where they could put the dock.
But I see basically you've got three orange lines and the one out from shore. That is not, they can build beyond that, is that what we're saying? Because it looks like the dock would be beyond that.
Yeah, so the environmental report identified that they could project 26 meters out from shore, so shore being the current watermark, which would likely mean a floating dock to move as the water goes up and down.
And for further information to council, those not on the bay, 6 feet is basically about the distance that we've gone from 2012 to today. That's the rise is somewhere between 5 and 6 feet. So 6 foot at the end of a dock today would be basically the bottom would be shoreline almost, if the water were to recede to the same amount, to the same level it receded back in 2012. But again, I'm in favor of Councillor Hazelton's suggestion, and I thought we all got that correspondence and requested that North-South have a look at that, site.
Councillor Cooper.
I think it would be very wise that we all read the North-South report. I think Councillor Hazelton was going to address that earlier, and I hope he will. But I think the low water issue is significant. If we lift the hold has not been lifted on this at the present time, correct? So if we remove the hold and we allow access to this, and the water goes down, the owner can come back to us and say, we want to dredge, we want to blast, we want to get in there. And I'm very concerned about that. So I do not support removing the hold, based on the information that I've heard today, but also the information that we received last week, including an environmental study from a highly regarded firm, North-South. But those are my comments. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Rienko.
Okay, now, again, so I've not seen that report. Who paid for that? We didn't obviously pay for it. Somebody had to pay for that report. Who was the proponent of that North-South report?
I don't know.
Well, they don't just come around and do reports for that. Heck, somebody had to pay them. So I'm just wondering who paid them. And I say I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
So I suggest that we read it. Thank you.
Well, yeah, but I like to read it.
You didn't receive it. You didn't receive it.
I did not receive it. No, I would have read it if I had received it. And it sounds like Cynthia didn't receive it either. Maybe the mayor did. The mayor seems.
Well, I'm trying to find my copy of it to see who it was addressed to, and I've failed so far, but that doesn't mean, I do recall receiving one.
I just sent it to all of council. It was received last week, and it was sent to planning staff to circulate to members of council. So if you did not get it, I apologize, but I did just send it to you all right now.
Okay. I'd like to know who paid for it.
I'm going to suggest that if that's the case, that we actually postpone making any decision on this file. But I do have one question, if I may, and I'm not sure I understood correctly, but are you saying that even if we do not approve, let me call it a dock, the hold could be lifted? And that kind of surprises me, because you're saying we can lift a hold on a property that can't be accessed? Could you give, I would appreciate a little explanation on that, please.
Through your worship. So, yeah, the requirements to lift a hold are the completion of a survey identifying the high water mark and confirming the lot area above it. So that's to ensure there's adequate building envelope and they meet the lot area and lot frontage. So that they comply with. Whether or not, generally a property owner wants a dock, so they added the dock to the application so that they can have a point of access. They could pull their boat up onto shore.
Councillor Cooper, Councillor Douglas.
So, but it's up to the council to decide whether to remove the hold or not. Is that not correct?
Through your worship, yes.
Thank you. We'll go to the OB. Pardon me?
Council.
Let's go to the OB.
Councillor Douglas.
So be it.
So my understanding is that they've met the criteria to lift the hold.
That is correct.
So if they put this application in without the dock, they would have met the criteria.
Correct.
And they, at any time, can pull a boat up or barge or anything to the property once that they don't require a dock?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I still think that given the situation, they've met the criteria for the hold to be lifted. And I think it would be wise for us to allow them to have a dock to do minimal damage to the shoreline.
I'm going to add one comment to that. I have observed on numerous occasions when contractors are building cottages, they bring up a huge barge. We have a contractor in the room here who has a number of those huge barges, and they just charge into the best spot close to where they want, and then they build a road going up to the site. I'm concerned that with this fish habitat, if it is to have any significance, not only do we have to understand it better in its mapping, because we know a lot of this mapping was based on very old history and not always taking into account water levels. If fish habitat allows a contractor's barge to come in, but not a dock to be built, then there's something wrong with that ruling, just as if a hold doesn't require access to be lifted, there's something wrong with that bylaw, and I think that's something we as council should address in the future, and I would hope our planning department would take notes on that. Having said that, I think that there's a significant report that a number of people did not receive on this. I'm going to suggest that perhaps we defer decision on this until we review the information we have not yet read. I think that's just the most appropriate thing to do at this time. Councillor Cooper.
I would support that, and in addition to the recommendations that you just identified, that we need to consider those two areas that you raised. I think those are very good points, and so I'd support a deferral.
I mean, I will add that I know that the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests, if I got the letters in the right order, they went from nobody is allowed into fish habitat to some docks can be approved under certain conditions. But, you know, my also concern is even if we permit a dock, it doesn't mean the contractor is going to use it. No offense to contractors, but I know you often are practical.
You're a terrible one.
I didn't say that. Please.
Your Worship, I just want to make sure that if council is going to defer this today, that we have some specific reasons on why it's being deferred, so that we can staff can undertake the research necessary to potentially resolve those matters before coming back to council. I think from what I've heard today, one of the reasons for deferral is to read the north-south report.
Yes.
And understand it, I guess, and see if there's anything that needs to be addressed from that. So I think that would be item one. I don't know if there's any other concerns that I've heard. I think we heard concerns about access from the lake to get to the dock. We've heard some concerns about that. That is not something that the township has control over through our zoning bylaws. So that's, I don't think we can bring anything new to the table on that. I've had a look at the study that was completed by the proponent's environmental consultant, and it is identifying the most appropriate location for the dock, and does identify that it is an appropriate location where they've proposed. What the zoning bylaw amendment also establishes is some parameters around the dock, that it can't just be of a certain length, it's got to meet a certain length, and it's got to be structured in a certain manner in order to mitigate impacts on the fish habitat that exists in the area. So that's all been included in the bylaw already. I haven't heard any concerns about the dock structure itself. I've heard concerns about getting there, and I heard concerns about reviewing Mr. Bain's, or reviewing the north-south report. So
yes,
that's all I.
Well, I think part of the, if I may, part of the dock structure concern that you did hear is that we're concerned that I heard earlier that at the end of the proposed dock, it's about 6 feet in depth. We know that if we go down to 2013 water levels, that'll be almost dry, and therefore I'd be curious to know whether anybody's looked at how quickly the water drops off past the proposed dock. How much of an extension would they want to put on that dock if we were at 2013 water levels? And I think that's information that would be useful to know. Councillor Wienko.
Well, I don't know if we need an extension, because it looks like, well, three of the councillors are not going to change their mind anyway, and there's only 6 of us, so it'll get defeated anyway. So I don't think waiting a month is going to change anybody's mind. It may change my mind, doesn't matter, but the point is already, there's at least 3 people here today that will never change their mind.
Nobody will change their mind on council, because if that was the case, we wouldn't bother having council. I think it's quite possible people could change their mind with further information.
Well, I think the three people who are going to vote against it, well, I read the report, North South report, and I will read it too, obviously. But, okay, you can put it off for a month, but I don't think the vote's going to change.
Councillor Cooper.
Just sort of to respond to the analysis from the planning department, I haven't heard any response about the north-south report, so I think part of the job one for the next meeting would be also assessing that report, not just the proponent's report. That would be one recommendation I have. And if planning staff can come back to us and say it's hogwash and that this is just fabulous and you can convince me of that, I'll vote in favor of it. So I haven't made up my mind, but I would think it would be very helpful if we had a direct review of that report and other information that came in with that report. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelden.
Building on what Mayor Kutsier was saying a minute ago with respect to low water, it would be really helpful to have a water depth study showing what the water depths are as you project out through that fish habitat, because you may find that you could double the dock in low water and still not have access to the property. So without that low water contour, it's very difficult to make an informed decision.
I just want to add one thing. So staff will, if directed, we'll take a look at that. If it's deferred, we would take a look at that new information that's came. That report was provided to the township, this north-south report, on Thursday toward the end of the day. It was provided to planning staff on Friday. It's dated in February from this year. So I just wanted to make that clear that we hadn't seen it until most recently, but if it's deferred, we will take a look at that information.
Okay. Councillor Douglas.
I'd also like to know if we could find out who paid for that study, please. I'd like that to be included, if at all possible.
No, that's not really your purposes. Who paid for it?
Okay. Our new acting clerk has drafted up a motion that I'd like to read for your consideration, not for your vote yet, just for your consideration. And it reads, be it resolved that Planning Council defer zoning bylaw amendment ZBL 18/32, application for 818 Island 820, Georgian Bay, to a future meeting of Planning Council to allow for 1, council and staff to review the north-south report, 2, further information regarding the length of the dock providing a change in water levels to be provided, such as water depth study completed. Are council willing to vote on this motion? All those in favor of this motion, which is the motion to defer? Carried, thank you. So I guess I put carried or deferred here when, yeah, carried, okay. Council, do you have the stamina for the final one or without a break? Sure. Let's do it. This is for, oh, yes, sorry, yeah, if you could do that. This will be for Development Service Report 2019-71 Burt in regards to 2 Island 750 Honey Harbor. And Victoria, if you could wait until Councillor Bochuk has taken a seat, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I think everybody's ready now, I think. So our next application that is not subject to a public meeting is application Z1836 for Richard Burt regarding lands located at 2 Island 750 in Honey Harbor. So the public meeting regarding this application took place back in March of this year. So as you can see, the property is located east of Bosley Island and at the west opening of Big Dog Channel. So here, just to jog your memory, is an aerial photograph of the subject lands. And so the purpose and effect of this application, and again, this has slightly been modified since the public meeting. The purpose of this application is to rezone the lands from Shoreline Residential Island Type 2 Exception 51 to a site-specific Shoreline Residential Island Type 2 Exception 55 zone. And this would recognize the existing buildings and structures on the property. It would permit an in-water boathouse with a maximum width of 5.8 meters, length of 8.9 meters, and height of 3.5 meters, and to permit the expansion of an existing dock to the width of 3.1 meters and a maximum lot coverage of 11.1%. So again, the effect of this amendment would essentially allow the applicant to develop an in-water boathouse and permit a recent width expansion that has occurred on a part of the dock. So here is the property location on the zoning schedule from the zoning bylaw. And here we have the proposed site plan. So since the public meeting back in March, staff has undergone extensive additional consultation with the applicant and their agent on the application. And this has resulted in the proposed size of the boathouse being reduced from what was previously proposed. And this also resulted in then the proposed lot coverage as well going down from the boathouse size being reduced. So here is a copy of the survey of all the existing development on the subject lands. So some concerns have been raised to staff regarding the existing septic system on the property, as I'm sure some of you are aware. So I will provide some comments on this. Firstly, I would like to reiterate that the proposed development of the boathouse would not have any impact on the existing septic system, as it does not require any expansion. So the original septic system on the property was approved by the Ministry of Environment in 1981. In 2005, a new septic system was installed by the applicant that was given a permit by the township at the time, and it was reviewed and inspected by the building department back then. So the original system had a run of pipes of approximately 150 feet, whereas the new system in 2005 brought that down to approximately 17 feet of run. So essentially that raised area that you see on the property is the current extent of the septic system. So it is the opinion of the building department that the system is not currently underwater given its reduced size. And in order for the building department to require a new septic system, it needs to be considered failing, which is not the case in this instance by the building department. So 16 letters of support were provided by surrounding landowners to this property in support of the application. So given the reduced size of the boathouse, staff are in the opinion that the proposed development is of modest size, which is smaller than the smallest boathouse that the zoning does permit. This boathouse would be used for uniform interior storage for marine vehicles and accessories, and is located in an existing active docking area. Therefore, it would not disturb any additional area of the shoreline of the island, and staff do support the application. The bylaw in front of council today for decision does include the requirement for a site plan control agreement to be submitted prior to any building permits. So this is a requirement of the zoning bylaw amendment. If you have any questions for myself or the applicant, and also we're blessed with the chief building official being here today as well to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Councilors, who would like to start off the conversation? Councilor Cooper?
Could we, I heard your comments. My main concern is the septic system here. I understand that there are two different issues, but I just want to deal with the septic system before I comment about the boathouse. You have a picture a photograph from the air.
Yeah.
Yes. So essentially, from the survey and what I'm seeing here, it looks to me like we have about a third of an acre island of granite, a shoal, and a septic system in between. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that description could be valid. Essentially, back when the original septic system was permitted by the MOE, this area was filled in to my knowledge, and there was a permit that was provided at that time. So the way that we are looking at the property itself is however you wish to describe it.
But, you know, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. So it looks like two pieces of land have been aggregated together. There's a wall around a mantle. There's a septic system closer to the house. And this picture, I'm assuming, was taken in lower water years. Have we inspected this in the last 3, 4, 5 days? With the water levels presently, we're at or above the high water mark, I would say. And I'd really be surprised if this isn't getting flooded. Maybe not the septic bed itself, but the mantle. When was this last inspected, and do we have a photograph of that? Thank you.
Through your worship, there was photographs submitted by another member of council that did illustrate the waters, I believe, a couple weeks ago. They may be able to confirm that. I myself have not been to the property in the last few days to identify that. I don't believe the building department has as well. However, the confidence in the CBO of the system that has been installed, they do not feel that as of right now it would be considered underwater by any means.
Councillor Jarvis.
Could we move ahead? There's a slide showing diagram done by the architect, whoever the designer. Keep going, keep going, go, keep going. There. You can see his cofferdam has been breached. That, I would suggest, was a high water mark in that 3-day blow we had. I could be wrong, but you have a pretty good idea that the cofferdam we built up was to, I believe, hold landfill and part of the septic field. I would strongly suggest that if the system is not perceived to be failing, then somebody hasn't done their homework on this, because in my mind, with the water levels shown here, and that's high water mark, there's an issue certainly in hand that needs to be addressed. I cannot support any work being done on this island without infrastructure being considered firstly. And I know there are implications there, but it doesn't make any sense to me. I know he's not adding bedrooms, he's not adding capacity to his septic system, but I strongly suggest that septic system is at a point of failure. I'm not an expert, but that's what it looks like to me.
Would the expert care to speak to this?
Can you pull up the slide that you sent me, the email picture?
Oh.
No, I provided one slide. No, it should be.
It's not on the slideshow.
I apologize, it's not on the slideshow, but I can.
I just tried to find it. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, that'll work.
There's the raised area there.
Yeah. Through your worship, the system was installed by the MOE and inspected in 1981. In 2005, the system was deemed failing. There was an existing steel tank, and the absorption trench ran pretty much the length of the property. That mound that you're seeing there is not all pipes. It would have been back when it was installed in 1981. When I went out there, I had the contractor specifically leave the last 2 pipes in so we could see what was in the ground for that property. We fit a filter bed inside there. We got rid of the existing steel tank, which was 600 gallons, and we capped it off. This is my notes from 2005. Property now has 3 bedrooms, unable to fit a class 4 for 3 bedrooms. Will be able to meet the setbacks class 4 for the building code. No, will never be able to exceed 3 bedrooms. So They installed the septic system, it was inspected, and the grades were passed by myself when I was there. On September the 8th, 05. That is not giving you a true picture. One would tend to think that the pipes run the full length of that. They don't. They're in the center of that. They're smaller than what was originally approved by the Ministry of the Environment. When the treatment is done for the septic system, it's 10 inches of suitable sand, 30 inches of filter sand, and then the mantle further polishes the effluent that comes out of the ground. We left the sand in there to further treat it coming out of that. We didn't dig it away, we made the situation better. Does anyone have any questions?
Councillor Douglas, Councillor Jarvis?
In your opinion, Dave, was it suitable at that time for that septic, the way it was redone?
The fact that the Ministry of the Environment gave them a septic system back in 1981 for an absorption trench, I wasn't comfortable when I went on site putting that in. We made it better, we cut it back to 17 feet, the pipes are 17 feet. They fit inside the footprint. And like I say, when I went out there, I made sure that the 2 pipes that were in there, I was able to see them and shrink it further inside that envelope on top of that bed. I got rid of the steel tank, we put a 1,000-gallon tank in, and we put a 17 by 17. My file notes clearly indicate that they can't expand over 3 bedrooms on that property.
So in your opinion, the septic that's in there now is suitable for the conditions that we have now for the water levels? It is operating
Right there,
to
to
capacity?
me, that's not failing.
Okay.
In that photo there that I'm looking at, that's not failing.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jarvis, followed by Councillor Douglas. Sorry, Councillor Cooper.
Dave, thank you. I just put it for clarification, the rise in that land there, is that what you're saying is the bed and tank?
The tank and bed are located in that mound. It's, the pipes wouldn't extend the full distance in that bed. They would be inside that.
Do you mind pointing out, so the lower level is not part of the bed at all then, is what you're saying?
That's the mantle. The tank would be in here and the pipes would be located in here, and then it's further treated in here, it comes out, and this is all mantle area in here.
So effluent would initially be treated from the tank and at the upper level, and anything that came out from that would go down into the mantle?
Exactly, it would go in the tank, come out the outlet, and then the header and the pipes would be in here, and then it would be further polished going down.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Dave.
Councillor Cooper.
So this is a lovely photograph, and I'm not sure that that is representative of what we're seeing today, or certainly would have seen on Friday. But my question is, would this site not be much safer with a holding tank?
They were permitted a septic system from the thing. He's not applying for anything to increase the flow on this property.
That's not my question. My question is, would this site not be safer, given the current water levels, with a holding tank? Just as we saw had to happen out on an island in front of us here.
So what you're not comparing apples to apples. You're talking about something that we caught, building without a permit that we found out and we were issuing the permit for. This thing has an existing approved sewage system from the Ministry of the Environment. If a house was built in the 1950s, would you make them tear it down and not build on it?
No, I think I'd make sure that everything was completely safe with the best possible solution. And my question is, would this be safer or not with a holding tank?
My response would be if he was applying for something that was increasing the flow to the property and it was failing, we would go and look at it. He's applying for a boathouse. He's not applying for any living quarters. He's not applying for fixture units or bedrooms.
Your Worship, if I just may clarify, just if this individual or if this property owner were to come to the building department, I just want to make sure Dave hears this. If this property owner were to come to the building department and ask for permission to install a holding tank today, would the building department be able to consider that application or not?
Yes, we could.
Could consider that?
If he wanted the homeowner wanted to put in a holding tank for that property, yes, we would consider it.
Okay.
Councillor Hazelton, followed by Councillor Bocheck.
So, thank you, Dave, for your input. I'd like to ask you a couple more questions. First of all, the elevation of the bottom of a tile bed, area bed on Georgian Bay on an island, what's that elevation? Is it at a meter or above high water mark?
That's what came into effect with the zoning regulations. That we're talking about something that was approved by the Ministry of the Environment in 1981.
I understand. I'm not trying to dispute that. I don't think you or anybody here has done anything wrong. I think that what some of us are concerned about is what appears to be, how could you ever do that kind of thing? So previous approvals, understand, we're not debating that. We're just saying that, you know, the applicant is looking for a change in the property. It may not be a change in the density of use or the accommodation to the septic system, but one of the things that we struggle with in our township is the lack of trigger points to revisit things. And I'll just share one comment that there are other townships that, for example, when a property changes hands, there is a requirement to revisit the septic system, have it properly inspected, invasively inspected before that property can be sold. We don't have anything like that in our township. It's really just more of a visual inspection. And so when we look at situations like this where somebody's trying to do something new, there is certainly a desire to look at the whole property and say, what could be better? And in a, you know, if he didn't have this thing in place today, and he was coming to you and saying, I need to put something in place, it sounds to me like, given that you would authorize a holding tank, that's rarely done unless there are extreme circumstances, as I understand it. And so if we were to be dealing with a fresh situation, it would be a holding tank to ensure the safety of the environment. And so what I'm really wrestling with here is, although I see it, I hear from you, and I'm not debating that it appears to be working as designed. But with the high water that we've got, with the wave action that we have in that island area, massive boats going by, it's not just about water levels, it's about 2 or 3 foot wave action going by on that property. It just kind of all adds up to me to be a high risk for polluting the environment concern. I don't know if it is, but I'm just saying it certainly looks like a high risk, and if there was an opportunity to take action to fix that high risk, then I think that would be something that would be welcomed from my perspective. Thank you.
Councillor Bocheck.
I'm going to seek a question of clarity, and then I'm going to digress back to what we're here for, which is the boathouse. Dave, is it not true that Section 8 states clearly that if there's the ability to have a septic system on the property, it must have that system, and you cannot put a holding tank in unless, according to Section 8, there's no possible way to have a field bed, basically?
Yes, if this was a developed piece of property that was there and there was no sewage system and they couldn't meet the setbacks, then they would get a holding tank. Like I say, I'll reiterate, back in '81, the ministry put in an absorption trench, which was way too long for the property. I went out specifically by myself for the inspections. I did the base, and I did the grades inspection on it. The grades inspection was completed September the 8th, 2005. I wasn't comfortable permitting them to replace the existing pipes that were much longer with the absorption trench. if you have a class 4 absorption trench, for argument's sake, and you had 3 bedrooms under 200 meters squared, 20 fixture units, it's 200 feet of pipe, usually 4 runs 50 feet long. With the filter bed, I was able to cut that back, look at the pipes that were in there, get rid of the steel tank. In my mind, I made the situation a hell of a lot better than what it was back when the ministry did this in 1981.
Okay, so I will digress now and head back to what's at hand. And to the planning department, I'm having a little bit of trouble, even though I'm an avid boater, and I go through the dog channel, and I know this is on the Beausoleil side of the channel. Could you orientate me to where the main channel is, where the marker buoys allow vessels to travel by this island? And what I'm getting at here is, I think the picture I'm looking at is a photograph, an aerial photograph of the island itself. Nope, not that one.
I'm going to keep going.
Here we are,
There.
okay. So could you show me on this picture where the main channel is in relationship to the site they're wishing to put the boathouse?
So through your worship, a caveat, I am not an avid boater.
The main channel runs just to the left of the photograph.
Main channel is
So to my understanding,
And the docks are kind of on the east side of the island, if you will. So this is facing west.
Okay.
This is the other main channel going north. So the mega boats that are coming up here are coming up this way with their wave action hitting there.
If you look carefully at the diagram just to the right of the docks, you can see some shoals in the water there. Only knowledgeable locals go through that, we'll call it shortcut.
Okay. So my question is, and this is directly related to the application, we, upon occasion, or every time we see an application like this, we consider a narrow channel of water or a narrow body of water, which is not necessarily a main channel, but a navigable channel. And my question to the planning department is, in the location that has been chosen for this boat port or boathouse, why would that not be considered a narrow channel of water?
so through your worship, the way that we define a narrow water body when it comes to the permittable projection of a dock, etc., is by the measurement of shoreline to adjacent shoreline. And in this instance, this is greater than the 61 meter maximum that would be considered a narrow water body. When it comes to shoal areas within the water that, of course, like the mayor said, locals would have knowledge of, that's not something that we're able to consider when we speak to a narrow water body. It is just shoreline to shoreline.
So my concern is that what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with an application at a point of extremely high water at the table or above the table some days, and that in a regular 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, would those shoals be above the water and actually be small islands in that area? Or do you know?
Yes.
I heard something from somewhere. Oh, okay. So that my concern is that that this could be a narrow body of water that we're allowing this boathouse to be, this application to be looked at, and in particular right now with high water, we don't see these shoals in there and it being a navigable body of water. So my concern is basically that we could be allowing an application to proceed in a body of water that would be considered a narrow body of water. And I just needed clarification that our planning department is satisfied for any future dealings with this, that this is not a narrow channel of water.
To our CBO.
With all due respect, Brian, if this was something like that, we would vet it through Transport Canada. We've had boathouses where they've made them put lights on them and so on and so forth. So this application would go through to them and they would make comment on what needed to be done, if anything.
Okay, I'd be satisfied with that. Thank you, Dave.
Through your worship, I just wanted to add an additional comment to Councillor Bochek's comments. Just as some additional information, so the location that they are proposing the boathouse is the same location that current active docking does exist on the property. So when thinking of, for instance, additional boat traffic, etc., it is just more of a matter of it being covered docking. There is docking that is active in this area. They're not proposing it any closer or in a different location to any potential shoals. This is the docking location that has been on the property for a very long time, to my understanding. So that is one of the reasons why the planning department is satisfied with the proposed location, because it is the existing active location on the property.
Okay, thank you for that information.
Councillor Jarvis?
Mr. Mayor, would you mind pulling up the site plan diagram again? I just want clarification on the, there, okay. The previous one might be better. I couldn't on my sheet. Can you show me the high water mark on that?
Sure. So
Around the septic area. Again, I'm going back to septic, yes.
Sure. So through your worship, this dotted line here is the high water mark for the main portion of the island. There's a small area down here that is above the 177.4, but that is not included in the lot area.
Okay, and so if we're considering the 177.4 line, David, please clarify for me, the square within that, between that and the cottage is the active septic tank and bed, correct? Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I would say it would be yes.
So I'm not sure if we've exceeded the current high water, but there's anticipation that we will be if we haven't already. I am still extremely concerned, despite what I've heard, and I really appreciate, I understand that, you know, what has been accepted in the past, and that you've done significant work to look at this. We worry about not just what the water is doing outside or above the grade or on the grade, but also within the grade, because your water table underneath or within the soil will be going up with the water level on the lake as well, I presume. So is there no concern that there's no impact to that field with water, possibly exceeding the high water mark, which to me looks like it's hitting, you know, it's impacting the corner of that field. I'm worried about, I've seen it already, shoreline erosion, higher water table, that type of aspect. Those are my concerns.
So with all due respect, if we go back to that picture that was showing everything there on the property, the water wasn't up to the bed, it wasn't up to the mantle area or anything. If it does get up there, site specific, if I get a complaint and somebody tells me, we will go out and look at them, we will deal with them one by one, site specific. On this here, yeah, you got the survey showing that. I was shown a photo, I don't know when it was taken, and the water clearly wasn't up to the bed, it wasn't up to that elevation.
Yeah.
I was by there with my own boat on my vacation 2 weeks ago, and I went around that property, and it wasn't up. Yeah, the water's high, but it's not up impacting that right now.
I accept that.
Councillor Douglas, followed by Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. A good point from our CBO on that one. I think this application is dealing with a not a dry boathouse, but a boathouse going in an area that's already developed with docks. And I think to what our CBO is saying, I think if we have a separate issue with flooding of areas and complaints coming in, they should definitely be checked. But I don't believe that from what you're saying, that's an issue at this point, from your opinion, with this particular property. You feel it's quite safe in where it stands right now, including with the boat wash and high water levels?
Yes, that's correct. With what he is applying for the boathouse, the septic to me on this date, on the date that I was there, didn't appear to be failing. If we do get a complaint about a sewage system, please let me know. We'll look at them.
Thank you.
Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. The focus here on the septic is sadly for Mr. Burt an example that's in front of us that is typical of actually several properties out in the bay where we have concerns where septic systems have been built in the past and visually look like they're at issue. In this case, we're dealing with a 0 meter setback from the high water which of course would never be approved in the future. So, question to planning. We have, and this is unfortunately more of a general question, it's less about this application, although it relates to this application. We have identified many properties, when I say we, the people in the coastal communities, where septic systems look like they are potentially failing. They certainly have characteristics with, for example, zero setback, where they are likely failing, although it costs a lot of money to prove that they're failing. So what opportunities do we have from a planning perspective, from a building perspective, to revisit these properties out on the bay and separate this topic here, such as is there an opportunity to not just sit back and wait for complaints, but to be able to receive information from the community about target properties that are at risk, and have the township go out and do a rigorous inspection, including water sampling on the outside of the properties at appropriate times, so that we can identify whether or not these systems are in fact failing or not, and separate that issue from the boathouse issue, which I personally think is a very simple issue and easy to approve. But the hesitation here is that this is a perfect example of many properties on the bay where there are septic system related concerns because of high water, and we probably need to do something about it. So how do we transition from where we are today into aggressively identifying strategies to deal with these potential problems so that we are not polluting our water?
I think that the CBO has already answered that. If he receives a complaint about a system that you believe is failing, he will go and look at it. And he does not have a file on his desk of every single system that says, sorted by how close they are to the high water mark. So I think without us being the general public providing him information on specific systems, I don't think we can expect our department to go out and look at every single location without providing that identification service for him. But I think that we would spend a lot of time talking septic, but in reality, the application here is for a boathouse. And I think we should bring the discussion back to any questions related to boathouses. And I think any septic discussion from now on should be outside this particular application, because while I think it's a very worthy conversation, it isn't addressing the application in front of which is the boathouse itself. Councillor Cooper.
With all due respect to the comments, I think we're talking about maybe a change in mindset with the current high water levels that we have. And it is relevant to this particular application in my view. I think we need to not say that we'll give you this approval if you'll fix your system. I think we really need to be saying as a township that we need to be out looking at situations like this before we approve anything else. So that'd be my view, that we need to do a full examination of this property before we approve anything else. Full stop. And if we're sitting back waiting for complaints, they may or may not come. That doesn't mean that we won't end up with a Walkerton situation. So we need to think about that. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
I understand separating the issues here on the one hand. On the other, I'm in line with Councillor Cooper and Hazelton on this. Is you can't sort of consider one without the other, because it's a significant issue. I talked to one of the neighbors that had been okay with the original application for this property, and when they were advised that there might, and only might, be an issue with the septic system because of the high water mark, they were aghast with that concept. I know that we can't sit here and go, well, you do this, we'll allow that. That just isn't not something we do here. A point of clarification, the photo that I provided, that was that side picture, was taken on May 28th. The water levels are up since that photo was taken. And they were also up over the last 3 days with the wind blowing. Property that has infrastructure problems.
We have in front of us, I would argue, three alternatives. Alternative one is to call for a vote on the resolution and have either a pass or a defeat. Or alternative, and for whatever reasons, that each councillor may choose to vote one way or another. I suppose we could always defer it, or perhaps, and I don't know what our powers are, and I'm asking our CAO and our clerk to comment on this. Can we make an amendment to this resolution saying approval subject to septic inspection or something like that? Is that even within the realms of our powers? Perhaps.
I think the last item you raised was subject to an inspection or something to that effect.
I mean, there's clearly a number of councillors here who are quite concerned that we might be approving the addition of a boathouse on a property where the septic might be failing.
Yes, there's no doubt that's the case. That's what I'm hearing as well. And the overall general concern by some of councillors seems to be the addition of additional planning approvals or additional development rights on a property with infrastructure that may be failing. We don't know the details. So could there be some additional study done on the system? There could be. We're hearing from the building official today that the system is above the elevation required and that it's functioning appropriately. So we've heard that information. If council gives us specific direction to go back and look at that, we can. We also, from a planning point of view, and what this application is about, is it's about a boathouse, that it's about a boathouse that doesn't require an expansion or any modifications to the existing system at all. I'd like to make it clear as well that the applicant has reduced the size of the boathouse from the boathouse that was brought to the public meeting. They've reduced this to the smallest category. Georgian Bay Township in the zoning bylaw has different sizes for boathouses based on the frontage of a property that exists. And the size of boathouse that is being proposed here is the smallest size of boathouse, but the frontage is one of the larger size of frontage. So they're not asking for a large boathouse, they're asking for the smallest category. From a pure land use perspective, it's reasonable to have an accessory building on a shoreline residential property. This would be the only accessory building on the property. So it's not an unreasonable request, but I don't really know how to answer that.
Well, my concern is, what I'm hearing from council is nobody has a significant issue with the boathouse. I think that would pass. But they're very nervous about the septic system. And my concern, to be quite honest with you, is that I call the vote, it'll get defeated, and it has nothing to do with the boathouse, why it's defeated. That's my concern. And I don't want to be unfair to the resident or the planning department, that, you know, where we vote something down where we don't actually have an issue with the boathouse, because my sense is I'm hearing 90% conversation about septic and 10% about the boathouse. So that's why I'm wondering whether we can do I'm almost going to call it a conditional approval, based, you know, often we do things based, you know, with a site plan. Can we add with a full septic inspection to our resolution? Is that a possibility?
To your worship, I don't think we can do a conditional approval. We either defer it, get some information about the septic, come back for consideration. There seems to be peace of mind that if the septic's dealt with, that there doesn't seem to be, the only concern I heard in any of the discussion related to the boathouse was the narrowness of the water body and the comments from Councillor Bocek. I think that was the only concern that I heard related to that. So I guess we could defer it, but I hear you.
Okay,
The
well.
problem is we're dealing with an application that doesn't require consideration of a septic, and that's what's absorbing us.
I see the applicant raising their hand. Would council have any objection if we allow the applicant to make a comment?
I have no objection.
Please, sir.
Is just in a point of clarification, even if we have approval at this point, we still have to go under site plan control. Is that not true? And there's another condition of site plan control to say that we would have to have a reassessment of the septic field. And every site plan control will look at the entire site and would say, and the reassessment of the site plan could be a condition of the site plan control.
I'm not sure our site plan control normally involves a septic inspection.
So through your worship, or to your worship, that is correct. It doesn't typically have a full septic inspection. However, once a building permit comes through planning and passes essentially the zoning requirements and the fact that they went through the site plan control approval, the permit is then given to the building department, which then it is my understanding that for any application, they would identify if there is any type of requirement in the sense of needing more look at the septic system. But as the CBO has mentioned, in the sense of no expansions required, I can't see that being an issue, but maybe the CBO should speak better to how the building department would look at that.
I'll address that. So your worship, if council passes the zoning bylaw amendment today, if they were to pass it, and we know there's a site plan agreement required, you can't make the septic system conditional through the site plan process. That's not appropriate in this instance. So we either, in my view, the right thing to do is either deal with the application today and make a decision one way or the other, or defer the application and we ask for some additional information on the septic. Planning staff don't think that's necessary because that's outside the purview of what this application is dealing with. But if that's what council wants to do, then we can make that request, or council can make that request. If it sounds like it's difficult, it is difficult because we're asking us to do things that aren't
Yeah, well, that's fair.
required under the plan.
So I'm going to now ask council to comment on the possibility of deferral. Councilor Douglas, I saw your hand up. Councilor Bochek, Councilor Cooper.
It sounds like we have a big concern, well, and we do have a big concern with the high water and septic systems, but as it pertains to this application, I think we should deal with this application on the boathouse. But then there should be probably something put on our agenda sooner rather than later on how to deal with the fact that we do have high water. We could possibly have properties out there that are in danger of breaching, and how we want to deal with it as a whole. And perhaps this property will be one of them that goes on that list that needs to be looked at. But I think it's unfair to try and pull something in that we don't have a mechanism to do that and defer or even turn this application down. However, I do recognize that we potentially do have a problem out in Georgian Bay with a lot of properties. And so maybe that can be one way, is if everyone is happy with the boathouse, pass the application, but also we should be having some discussion of how we're going to deal with the high water right now and possible properties, and perhaps this property is one that needs to be looked at again. That would be my suggestion.
Councilor Bochek, followed by Councilor Cooper.
Okay, I'm going to direct this directly at the planning department because I'm going to deal with nuts and bolts instead of semantics here. And if we do not approve this, the applicant has the ability to take it to the LPAT, or whatever they want to call it today, and appeal our decision. Would the LPAT even consider anything to do with the septic bed, being that it is not directly related to this application for the boathouse, and in turn, in the appeal, our decision would be overturned? It would cost money, time, staff, and everything else. I have to know that we're dealing with the boathouse, and that if we turn down this application and the applicant decides to appeal, will the LPAT consider anything to do with this septic system?
Through your worship, I was actually going to make a point about this prior to Councillor Bochek bringing it to our attention about just sort of the potential options going forward and what might occur. So specifically, would the would the LPAT deal with the septic system as part of the application or even make it a consideration? I think that's what you're getting at. They can consider a number of things, and I can't speak for what the LPAT would do, but I can speak from experience and understanding their jurisdiction. And the LPAT does not have jurisdiction under the Ontario Building Code Act, but they have jurisdiction on decisions made under the Planning Act. So my experience and understanding of their jurisdiction is that they would not consider the septic system in this instance because it's an accessory building, being a boathouse that does not have any habitable space associated with it. So there's no septic system. So my experience would be that no, it would not be a factor. I can't say what an individual chairperson might or might not do, but I would suggest that their answer would be they don't have jurisdiction because it's a building code matter. So with that, I think it's some moving on from that question, just about potential courses going forward and what might happen. Because I'm thinking a little bit about if you were to defer this and ask for the proponent to provide details about the functioning of the septic system and the appropriateness of it, what might that look like and what might that entail, that exercise. I think that would likely entail the exposing of the pipes and some work to demonstrate that the system is actually functioning appropriately. That might be a costly endeavor on an island property as well. So I'd suggest that the option to the proponent, they would also have the option not to do anything. And if council does not make a decision one way or the other, they would have the option to appeal to the LPAT on the basis that council has not made a decision on their matter, and it would get adjudicated accordingly without our decision in place. So that's something that might happen. I want to make sure council's aware of all of the items. What might also happen is the applicant might say, yes, we'll expose the pipes, we'll undergo that expense, confirm that it is working or not working, and do the remediation if that is necessary. Those are two paths that could happen. I just want to make sure council's aware of those.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councillor Cooper, but I'm going to ask Councillor Wink if you wouldn't mind being temporary chair while I step out for a moment.
Councillor Cooper, comment?
Thank you, Chair Wienko. I don't want to turn down this application for the boathouse. That's not what I'm concerned about today. I hope that the applicant will take into account the concerns that are being raised about the septic system, and I think a 1-month deferral to make sure that we're not affecting the environment is worthy. The first thing that we identify in our strategic plan is that the environment is the most important thing to us. And I think we have to remember that. And if there's any chance whatsoever that this bed is being impacted by the current water levels that, as Councillor Jarvis has pointed out, the pictures that he sent, which were concerning, were in May, and the water is up significantly from May. Not an inch or two, several inches. So, and that's not considering storm surges, which can be anywhere up from 2 to 3 feet. So, I would suggest that 1-month deferral and an inspection provided so that we can come back and visit this, and if it's fine, great. If the system's working and it's not under threat, I suspect all of us would be more than happy to approve this boathouse. But for the moment, it's the environment, and I have to put that first. Thank you. So I would suggest deferring for a month. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis?
Just based on what Councillor Cooper has just said, I'm in agreement with his comments entirely, just in case the proponent wanted to know how I felt on this whole thing. I have no objection to that boathouse. My objections aren't really with concern to what we've been discussing here. I'm really hoping that we could cooperatively agree to a deferment pending a look at that septic system. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelton?
Cynthia, don't fall off your chair here. I fully agree with what Councillor Douglas said a few minutes ago. And I think that what I feel really bad about is Mr. Burt is being caught in a bind here between what we should be doing on a broader scale in Georgian Bay and all the characteristics of the concerns that we have been, that we know about as you drive up and down the bay, where there are lots of examples of this kind of issue. We need to address them. We don't just need to address Mr. Burt and his issue, potential issue. We need to address them all. And so I would like us to, in my head anyways, I would like to separate the issues. I would like to allow this boathouse application to go ahead. And I would like us as council to aggressively move forward with a plan to look at many properties on the bay that have characteristics like this. And this property may in fact come back to an issue that needs to be addressed later on from an environmental perspective, but I would hate to slow down the boathouse issue when this is only one of many properties that need to have consideration environmentally on the bay.
Thank you. Councillor Wanko, thank you for covering for me. Please go ahead.
Hope everything worked out. You said you had to have an official, or you had to have some kind of a, somebody file a complaint in order to do an inspection. Is that correct?
I've heard of, from two different people, that there's possible failing septic systems out in Georgian Bay. I specifically made contact with them and asked them to please provide me with an address. I have not heard from either of them to date. If you've got a specific property that we need to look at, let me know.
Okay. Can we?
So the answer is yes.
Can we officially make a complaint today, which means you have to do an inspection? Otherwise, we'll approve the boathouse. We'll make an official complaint to you today, and that you'll have to take a look at this system in the coming weeks. Is that doable?
So you're saying a complaint on this property to go out and look at it today? Well, not today, but sometime.
Yeah. Can council do that? Maybe the, you know, why can't I make a complaint? Why can't anybody here make an official complaint? And then that forces you to go out.
Guess there's a first for everything.
Okay, so let's make an official complaint, and then you'll have to inspect it, and we'll approve the boathouse today.
Councillor Bocek.
I'm willing to move ahead with a vote and don't support a deferral on this.
Council, shall I read the motion at this point? Be it resolved, the council adopts bylaw 2019-31, being a zoning bylaw amendment for zoning bylaw 18/36 for 2 Island 750 Honey Harbor. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Carried. Thank you.
Do you want to make an official complaint, though? Do you want to?
I'm not sure we have to do that through council.
Well, Dave.
I will go out.
Pardon me? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, does the chair
Yep.
say something?
You want to make it? It has passed.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. I'm the owner, okay? I'm older than anybody here in the room. My grandparents settled in Quite Roberts Island in 1912. I spent my whole life in Honey Harbor. Our history is such, we were on Picnic Island at one time. And we built a small family cottage on this particular island. And we have got approvals and have not gone and done things behind the council's back or anything else. This island, I sit on the front porch, which looks right over my septic system. And if you think that I want a smelling, poor, whatever system in front of my house. Wrong. I am prepared to make sure that septic system works. And I have pictures here that show the existing docks at low water, where the dock is literally sticking out of the water by 5 to 6 feet. I have experienced the high levels and the low levels, and it changes. But that septic system works. It works very well, and we've had it inspected, replaced, and we've had even inspections on inspections since 2005, I guess it was, when it was in there or replaced, and nobody has ever made a complaint on it. If there's something that has to be done to that section, as an owner of a property, and as a person who has been in Honey Harbor for almost 100 years, not me, I'm 80 some odd, but the family has been here for over. It's a beautiful place. I love it. I have, but I've seen a little higher because it'd be lower. I know my cottage will never sink, or this whole property is going to be done. But this particular letter to Mr. Bird, it says, encloses the use permit for the sewage system on Island 130, Georgian Bay. Because of the unusual nature of the construction of the facility and because of the varying water levels of the Great Lakes, this letter is to inform you that if the water levels rise above the present levels of sand-filled mantle between the gabion baskets and the septic system, the owner will be responsible to ensure the additional material should be imported to maintain this treatment as a dry mantle area. That's my obligation. And I'll look after it because that's my home, that's my cottage. I'm not about to try and sit there and hoodwink somebody and say, we can't do this. Oh, no, 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 no. We've got inspection. We've got the permits that were granted by your department. These people are people of integrity. And so, what I'm saying is, I don't think we have to sit here, and thank you, first of all, for the approval of the boathouse that took 4 years to get done, but however, and considerable dollars. But I'm a citizen of Honey Harbor, have been and will be, and my grandkids will be too. We'll do whatever we have to do to make sure that septic system works. That's our home.
Sir, thank you very much for your comments. Thank you very much for your patience. I realize that much of this discussion was somewhat independent of your particular application. I appreciate your patience, and I hope you appreciate our concern about the overall bay, because I think you share it. Thank you.
I do. Thank you.
Council, the motion in front of me reads, be it resolved the council adopts bylaw 2019-89, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the August 12, 2019 Planning Council meeting. All those in favor? Carried. Be it resolved that Planning Council does now adjourn at 11:36 a.m. until Monday, September 9th, 2019 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? Carried. I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.